So the read method of the grades class is going to take integers from a file or from an input stream, and they are going to add them to the vector. The vector class has a method called Pushback, and that adds a new element to the end of the vector, and it also increases its size. So we're going to be using the Pushback method. And we have two versions of the read method. We have the read method that takes a file name as a parameter. And all this is going to do is open the file name, and then once it opens the file, it's going to pass the input stream to the other read method. And I'm not going to do any error handling. That's something that you can think about. One thing we could do is we could print a message saying the file did not open. A lot of times people are not there to read error messages like that, and really you want to send a signal back to a program. You're also determining how someone has to handle the error if you're hard coding print messages in there. We could use a return type like an integer, and 0 means positive, means successful termination, and something non-zero means that there was some sort of an error. Really what we need to do here is wait till we get to exceptions and have this method throw an exception, but that's something we usually cover in the next class. So for now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to open this IF stream. I'm going to call it fin for file input. And as you know, I can't pass a C++ string to this constructor. I have to convert it to a C string or a C style string. And if that happens, if fin is true, if fin evaluates to true, that means that this open, that it successfully opened the file, and now I can pass this to the read method that takes an input stream. Now, one of the bad things about this implementation is it fails silently, and you're just going to get an empty vector. I don't know, is that okay? Is that good? So think about ways to improve the error handling and where that error handling mechanism may be problematic. So the second are the overloaded read that takes an iStream as an argument. So here's what we need to do. So when we call this method, we're going to have the grades object, right? We're going to have some grades object, and then we're going to have the grades vector inside, and it's going to be empty. I'm just going to use this single line to represent an empty vector. And then I've got some input stream, and there are some integers in there. Let's say that this is my input stream. And I've got a series of grades in there, 86. These have to be separated by white space, of course. Just like that, so on and so forth. This will work for any number of integers in the input stream. And the first integer here, and so one question is, are we adding the grades to this vector? Are we replacing the ones in the vector? So that's a good question. You might think about, again, positive and negatives. Maybe instead of read, we want an add method. So let's assume that we want to remove the elements if there are grades in there. And we can use two methods of the vector class to do that. The first one is the empty method. It simply returns true if the vector is empty and returns false otherwise. So if grades empty, and this is going to return true if the vector is empty, and if this is not true, then what I want to do is I want to call grades clear. And clear removes all of the elements or all of the integers, in this case, present in the vector grades. So these are really useful methods if you want to see if a vector is empty and if you want to remove all of the elements in one method call. So this is going to make sure that we're always adding to an empty vector. So once we do that, now what we need to do is we just need to read the numbers in this stream and add them to the vector, and we're going to do that by using the pushback method. Remember that when we're reading from a stream, we have this pattern where we have input, and while the stream is good, then we want to process the input, and then we want to input another object. Okay, so we're going to follow this pattern. So the first thing we want to do is declare a variable for reading, and I'm just going to call that grade. So that's going to read the grades in my stream, and I'm ready to get the first input, and I'm going to read from this stream. So I extract grade from the input stream in, and if my input stream is empty at this point, this will go into a fail state, and this will evaluate to false, and I won't enter the while loop. That's one of the reasons this pattern is so important. But if this is true, that must mean that I read a valid grade and I'm ready to process the input. And in this case, when I'm reading, processing the input means adding the grade I just read to the vector grades. And to do that, I write grades.pushback, and there's an underscore there. And then I pass into the pushback method the object that I want to push back. Okay. What this does, if grade, let me get a little sloppy here, so let me create the variable grade in memory. So I just read grade, which is 86. I started with my little reading pointer in 86. So I read 86, and now that's gone from the stream. And there's my reading pointer. And now I'm going to push back 86 into the vector. So what it does is it adds a new element at the end of the vector and stores 86 there, and now this is at position 0. If I called size at this point, size would return 1. And now if you look, this is where I was processing, and so now I'm ready to get more input. So I use my stream extraction operator, and I read grade, another grade. Now I'm going to read 85. That replaces 86, and I've consumed that from the input stream. I go back to the top of my while loop. This evaluates to true, and let me just put an end of file marker here so we'll be sure that we pay attention to that. This evaluates to true, so I push back 85 to the vector. This adds a new element at the end of the vector. You know, nominally the bottom here is the back. This is kind of referred to as the top or the front. And we add, or we store 85 at that location. That location is 1, and now the size of my vector is 2. And so we just keep proceeding in that fashion. I read the next integer, which is 96. That gets stored in the variable grade. The input stream evaluates to true. I push back 96 on the vector grades, or in the vector grades. I read another integer, and this time I read 98. The stream evaluates to true, and I push back 98 just like that. And this time, I'm going to actually read the end of file marker. That's going to put this stream into a fail state. And when I evaluate in here, it evaluates the faults. That satisfies the termination condition. And I jump to the end of the while loop, and that's actually the end of my read method. And as you can see, I read all 4 integers from the input stream, and they're now stored in the vector grades. So those are the 2 read methods. Now we look at how to print those and how to compute the averages, or the average of the grades in the vector.